Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Mr. Fortune's Trials by H.C. Bailey. Trial 2. The Young God. First published London Magazine, August 1924. The front of Brighton flowered in June sunshine. Conspicuously jaunty among that flippant crowd tripped the Honourable Sidney Lomas, Chief of the Criminal Investigation Department. By the lawns he was stopped. His advisor on the medical and other problems of crime stood in his way. "Are you up already?" Mr. Fortune inquired. "How doth the little busy bee improve each shining hour?" He put his hands behind his back and surveyed Lomas with reverent admiration. Well, it took a long time, but it's very beautiful." For the hat and the suit and the socks and the shoes and the playful tie were a melody on the theme of brown sherry. "You look like something that's left on the stage when the chorus goes. If you will rise at dawn and dress like a curate on holiday, of course you feel lonely." "I never feel lonely," said Mr. Fortune with indignation. "I am hungry, hence this bitterness. As for my clothes," he looked down complacently at the black tie and the dark grey flannel which draped his solid form. "My nature is respectable." "You are getting fat," Lomas agreed. "But what's the use? While you keep that choir boy's complexion, no one will take you seriously." The cherubic face of Mr. Fortune smiled. "That's your corrupt mind. All simple souls believe in me. Hence your success with juries, Reginald." Reggie Fortune shuddered and turned away. It was understood that no word of shop must be spoken at Brighton. Both men's nerves had been frayed in the struggle to convict the reluctant alderman of the murder of the inspector of taxes. You remember that popular but ugly case? They had vowed that a long weekend should be free of any thought of crime. Lomas let his eyeglass fall. "Sorry, absolutely no excuse," he said, and took Reggie's arm. "Can aught atone?" "I was thinking of that sauterne for lunch," said Reggie. They made their way slowly through the Sunday crowd, impeded by opulence expanding itself, and women displaying for their admirers what art can do for nature. "The world is too much with us," Lomas said. "It is like being in a musical comedy, Reginald. We are the crowded chorus. Rather gaudy, rather noisy we are. No wonder chorus girls look bored. We're a musical comedy, and the audience jumbled together. I feel like somebody in the dress circle, Lomas. So innocent and humble." "There's somebody who knows he isn't." Reggie Fortune looked at the man, a magnificent creature towering out of the crowd with shoulders worthy of his height and a sunburnt aquiline face. He had a cluster of admirers round him, women and men. The passing crowd sent many a glance at him. He was well aware of it. "Worship him, don't they?" Lomas chuckled. "One of England's gods." "He's a noble young god," said Reggie. "It makes you feel alive to look at him. I saw him score his try in the last international, took the ball off the feet of the Scottish forwards and cut right through, and we all went mad." "Very uplifting, Lomas, old thing." "Oh, a splendid animal," Lomas agreed. "The big blonde beast in perfection. These be your gods, O Israel." For this young man was Douglas Charlbury, centre 3/4 for England and the most dashing bat in the Merry Sandshire team, and his portrait and his praises were in all the newspapers. After lunch, Reggie Fortune discovered that Sandshire were to play Sussex next day and was joyful. "Lomas, old thing, we will go watch the young god sport. If he don't bat, he'll be fielding, which is almost as good. The music of motion. Full orchestra." But it was not to be. When Reggie propped up his paper against the coffee pot on Monday morning, he saw a headline, "Sir Rodney Trale missing." It appeared that Sir Rodney, who lived on the South Downs, had not Ken seen since Friday night, and his family wanted news of him. Reggie sighed. For Sir Rodney Trale was the uncle of Douglas Charlbury. It was not likely that the nephew would be playing cricket for anyone till the uncle was found. Reggie finished his lonely breakfast. Lomas was invisible before noon, and wandered out. When he came back to the hotel, he saw a lank back which turned to show him a gaunt, dark face that grinned. "Morden?" Reggie groaned. "Go away, Morden." "Good morning, sir," said Inspector Morden briskly. "Lucky I found you. Mr. Lomas in, sir?" "Don't be so hearty, Morden. I can't bear it." Mr. Lomas is in bed, or in his bath. I'll have to see him, sir. The inspector came affectionately close and murmured, "Looks like a big thing, Mr. Fortune." Reggie groaned again and led him to the lift. They found Lomas sitting in front of his dressing table, perfecting that work of art, the wave in his hair. "Very sorry, sir," said Inspector Morden to the reproachful face which looked out of the mirror. "It's the Trale case. They've found the body and called us in." "What the devil is the Trale case?" asked Lomas peevishly, and Inspector Morden told him at length. Sir Rodney Trale lived with his sister and his niece in the ancient house of Chantry's, which stands in a park under the Downs. Sir Rodney, who was a great man on the turf, had his training stables dose by. On Friday evening he walked across the park to dine with his trainer. He ate that dinner, they talked horses, and he left the house about 10:30. "That's what the trainer says," Lomas murmured. "Just so, sir." Inspector Morden nodded. "Well, after that, Sir Rodney vanished. No one was sitting up for him. On Saturday morning, his valet found that his bed hadn't been slept in. The family rang up the trainer. They looked about for him. On Saturday evening, they called in the police." "They didn't hurry," Lomas murmured. Inspector Morden sniffed. "No, sir. He was rather a dark horse, was Sir Rodney. They might have thought he had some little game on. Police search began yesterday. This morning they got to dragging the lake in the park and they found him." He turned his beady eyes on Reginald. "That looks natural enough, as you might say. Gentleman after dinner tumbles into his lake. But the chief constable has phoned it to take it up and bring an expert. It's quite providential your being down here already, Mr. Fortune." "Providential?" Reggie gasped. "No, Morden, you have not a nice mind." They packed themselves into a car and drove away up the valley, where the turbid Adur winds under the buttresses of the chalk and on through the ancient piece of staining, till the steep northern scarp of the Downs rose above them, and they came upon great trees and the wide, misty green spaces of the Weald. The park of Chantry's is a pleasant place of little hills and little cliffs clothed in ancient velvet turf. The house of Chantry's is mellow red brick of the time when Wren was playing with Hampton Court. Mr. Fortune shook his head at it. "Elegant, isn't it?" he murmured, "and rather paltry. Same like you and me, Lomas. An insult to the everlasting hills." "Don't be romantic, Fortune. A little real is what we need." Lomas chuckled. There wasn't anything elegant about Rodney Trale. At the door they were met by a bluff military chief constable who said it was a bad business, and he was devilish glad to see them. They came into a hall hung with family portraits, and Reggie drifted from one to the other, while the chief constable told Lomas that he had nothing to tell him. "We've got the body, and that's all we've got. I hope your man can make something of it. I've got Trale's own doctor here, but he's no good at this sort of thing." "Fortune," Lomas called, and Reggie turned reluctantly from the portrait of a 17th-century Douglas Charlbury, the bold aquiline face of the young god of football and cricket looking out of a periwig. "Very vigorous and persistent family," Reggie murmured. "Trale blood always comes out, sir," said the chief constable. "Strong stock. Well, you'll want to see Sir Rodney. That is one factor in the problem," said Reggie dreamily. Sir Rodney's doctor was a pleasant old fellow. He received the great Mr. Fortune with the homage an anxious father would give to a capable son come to take trouble off his hands. "A terrible affair, Mr. Fortune. I fear there must have been foul play. I shall be so relieved to have you take the case. You see." And Sir Rodney was not pleasant to see. He lay in his sodden evening clothes, a bulky man of 60. His face was bruised in ugly colours, his lip was cut and swollen, and thus injured, the fierce aquiline features had a look of horrible malignity. Reggie bent over him. Reggie's hands went to his eyes, to his mouth. And after a long while, "Well, what did you make of it, doctor?" said Reggie. I'm very much afraid those injuries were inflicted before death, Mr. Fortune." Yes. "There was a fight, and then he was drowned, and rather a curious fight." "Yes, that's all he can tell us." The old doctor gave a sigh of relief. "That is death by drowning, then?" "Yes." Reggie gazed at him. "Yes, he died because he couldn't get out of the water. But why couldn't he get out of the water? And how did he get in?" "Really, Mr. Fortune, I have no idea," the old doctor cried. "He had, though," said Reggie, looking at the rage on the dead face, and the old doctor shuddered. "When they left that room, Two people came out of another, a young woman, short and frail, an old woman, even smaller, who leaned heavily on her arm. White hair and the wrinkles of ill health in the elder could not disguise how like they were in delicacy of feature and in the gentle simplicity of their dark eyes. "Dr. Turner," the young woman spoke, "can you tell us anything?" And Reggie Fortune liked her soft voice. "I am most distressed, Miss Charlbury. I'm afraid I must tell you, your poor uncle. There must have been foul play. Mr. Fortune—" "Oh, Miss Trale, Miss Charlbury, this is Mr. Reginald Fortune, the great authority on these cases." Mr. Fortune made his bow. The two gentle Laces looked at him with cold curiosity. "Mr. Fortune has formed the opinion that Sir Rodney was murdered." "Oh," said Miss Charlbury. "No, I wouldn't say that," Reggie murmured. "I didn't say it. What I have said is that Sir Rodney met with violence before his death." "Is there any difference?" said Miss Charlbury. "Oh, Joyce! Oh, my dear!" Miss Trale wept. "It's very good of you to help us, Mr. Fortune," said Miss Charlbury, and led her aunt away. Downstairs, Lomas and the chief constable were closeted together in a little library, more like an office, turning over many papers. "Well, Fortune, what about it?" Lomas cried. "The man was drowned. Before drowning, he was knocked about with fists by a rather hefty fellow, and somehow he got something poked into his right eye, something thin and narrow and sharp." "That didn't kill him?" "Oh, no, but it must have hurt. He might have lost the sight of the eye if he had lived. Nothing worse. How did he get stabbed in the eye if the other fellow was using fists? Lomas, dear, I wasn't the referee, nor am I a clairvoyant. He might have fallen on a spike, a splinter, a stump. But you can swear it was a fellow with a punch that hit him." "A very hefty fellow with a powerful left," said Mr. Fortune. "That's murder," said the chief constable, and lay back in his chair and looked with horror at Lomas. "What a terrible thing for the family." "They're rather a curious family," Reggie murmured. "My dear sir," the chief constable cried, "one of the best in the county." Lomas, who was again turning over papers, passed him one. It became clear to Reggie Fortune that he could be more use somewhere else. He drifted away. The family portraits in the hall again attracted him. The pattern of face and body which Sir Rodney Trale and his nephew both possessed was plainly hereditary. Big, fair, aquiline, high-coloured, the men of the family had been like that for centuries. But another strain showed itself. Many of the daughters of the house were of the dark, frail, gentle beauty which had come down to Miss Trale and Miss Charlbury. Reggie turned to find the family doctor behind him. The old man had been up to see Miss Trale. She had felt the shock sadly, and her health had never been good. Reggie said something civil. "Poor dear lady." The old man sighed. "Her brother to go first, and like this." She was devoted to him. "How often that happens, Mr. Fortune. Weak women give their lives up to watch over strong men." "Yes, yes. This is a curious family, Doctor. All the men are big and strong, and most of the women weak." "Very true," the old doctor sighed. "Splendid fellows, the Trale men. Have you ever seen Douglas Charlbury? His mother was a Trale, of course. He is Miss Joyce's brother. Curious how different they are. Poor dear Joyce." Between her uncle and her brother, he pulled up short. "Ah, Mr. Fortune, it's these weak women who save men's bodies and souls." It occurred to Mr. Fortune that they had not saved Sir Rodney's body, and he lacked confidence about the dead man's soul. But he did not say so. The old doctor bustled off, and Mr. Fortune wandered out into the park. He proposed to go down to the trainer's house and see what might be seen on the path by which Sir Rodney had walked his last walk. But he was diverted by the garden from business, which is one of his bad habits, and so he came into the park by a walk between noble yew hedges, in which hollows were cut for stone seats. Where the rolling turf of the park opened before him, he saw something glitter on the ground, and picked up a little piece of greenish-brown quartz carved into the likeness of a face with a queer long nose. He frowned at it and looked about him. As he stood, he was hidden from the park, but the path was not far away, and when he walked on, he saw the lake gleam in the sunshine. To the lake he went. The path came close to it, where the bank overhung the green water in a little white cliff. There, whether he fell or was thrown, it was probable Sir Rodney had gone in, and the water was deep there. It would not have been easy to get out again in the dark up that slippery chalk, and Sir Rodney had been battered, dazed, perhaps, or stunned before he went in. The grass was trampled and grey. That must have been done by the men dragging the lake. Reggie could make nothing of it, but as he moved to and fro, he saw a scrap of something whiter than the chalky grass. It was a chip of bone or ivory. It went into his pocket-book with the quartz face as he heard steps behind him. "Well, sir, not much here, is there?" said Inspector Morden. "They've stamped out anything there was. Is this where they found him?" "Out there, in 10 feet of water, not far from the bank. He couldn't swim, they say. I dare say he didn't feel much like swimming." "What, sir, was he dead before he was in the water?" No, he went in alive, but he'd been badly hammered." "My oath he had." Inspector Morden grinned. "I found that out, Mr. Fortune, this way, sir." He led on down the path. "See, there's blood, and big footprints there in the damp stuff. That's him, or somebody his size. Now look here, sir." By a spinney 200 or 300 yards farther on, the inspector stopped and pointed. The turf was torn and broken by deep footmarks, and there were scattered stains of blood. "What do you make of that, Mr. Fortune?" The inspector was triumphant. "That's a fight, all right." "Two big men, rather violent," Reggie murmured. "Anything else, Morden?" The inspector smiled. In the long grass at the edge of the spinney were the prints of large feet. "There was only one man in it, Mr. Fortune. He stood there and smoked a cigarette." Inspector Morden held out the stump of it. He could see Sir Rodney coming a long way off, and when the old man came, he went for him. "And he was a big fellow, and he smokes Aristide cigarettes," Reggie murmured. "Yes. You have it all, Morden, except one thing. How did Sir Rodney get drowned?" "The fellow may have knocked him out and thrown him in." "The lake." Reggie measured the distance with his eye. It was some 1/4 of a mile. "Hefty throw," he murmured. "Of course he'd have to carry the body to the bank," the inspector explained angrily. "Or Sir Rodney may have run him off, and the fellow came after him and finished him. Or Sir R may have tumbled in." Yes. There's lots of ways it could have happened, none of them what you'd call likely. All the same, it did happen, Mr. Fortune, and that's what's most unlikely." Well. Now we want a big fellow who smokes Aristide cigarettes. He ought to throw some light on it." "I should say so," said Inspector Morden. "Coming up to the house, sir." "I must see Mr. Lomas." But Reggie let him go and wandered hither and thither in the park and out of it. He found nothing, but in the lane where a small car had stopped, another Aristide cigarette. When he came back to the house, Sir Rodney's trainer, Captain Fern, was reporting himself to Lomas and the chief constable. Captain Fern, who possessed the physique and face of a jockey, had nothing to say, and kept saying so. He had bidden good night to Sir Rodney on his doorstep at 10:30 on Friday night, and had never seen him again. Sir Rodney was quite sober. There was no one about. Did he know of anyone who had a grudge against Sir Rodney? A successful owner of racehorses always had enemies, and Sir Rodney had been very successful. "So I have heard," said Lomas dryly, but the trainer knew of nobody in the district. No one who was likely to be violent, could not suggest anyone. Then Douglas Charlbury strode in, brusque and imperious. "Mr. Lomas? Which is Mr. Lomas? I'm told you want to see me, sir." "I hope to have seen you before, Mr. Charlbury. I'm playing for Sandshire, sir. We have been in the field all day." "Really?" Lomas put up his eyeglass. "Your uncle was found dead this morning." "So I have heard, but I don't understand why you want me. There is evidence that he was murdered, Mr. Charlbury." "What evidence?" "He was assaulted before he was drowned." "Where?" "Here in the park, on his way home from Captain Fern's house." Douglas Charlbury exchanged a glance with Captain Fern, which was not affectionate. "Who did it? Any evidence about that?" "Can you help us, Mr. Charlbury? I haven't been living here for over a year. I was on tour with the Sandshire 11. You have no suspicion of anyone?" Douglas Charlbury gave an angry laugh. "My uncle wasn't altogether popular. Fern knows that." "I don't know what you mean," cried Captain Fern. Again, Douglas Charlbury laughed. "If Fern can't tell you, no one can." "Really?" said Lomas. "I must own you disappoint me, Mr. Charlbury." "I don't know what you expected," said Douglas Charlbury. "Anything more, sir? I want to see my people." Lomas shook his head, and Charlbury strode out. "I'm afraid they were on bad terms, sir." Captain Fern shook his head. "Very sad. Sir Rodney felt it." "Really?" said Lomas, and got rid of Captain Fern too. "He's rather like a weasel, you know," Reggie murmured. "What's between them, the weasel and our young god? An angry young god it is." "Young brute," said Lomas. "It's an ugly business, Fortune." Yes, a curious family," said Mr. Fortune. The chief constable shook his head. "I fear so." "Only too true, sir. A most distressing case." "Quite," said Lomas briskly. "Well, Fortune, you went round with Morden, didn't you? Do you agree?" Morden touches the spot as ever. A large fellow lurked by the spinney smoking an Aristides and set about Sir Rodney. "Yes, we have no objections." "Anything to add?" "Well, there was another Aristides smoked in the lane where a small car stopped. That might have a bearing. Also, there was this by the lake." He displayed his fragment of ivory. "And that by the garden hedge." He produced the quartz face. "Asiatic, eh?" said Lomas. "Chinese, is it?" "Lomas, dear, you shouldn't say things like that. It exposes the department." "Not Asiatic, the other side of the world. American. Say Honduras or Yucatan, a work of the Maya culture." Lomas said with some satisfaction that he had never heard of the Mayas. "What's the other trinket? A Babylonian toothpick? Or a bit of Cleopatra's paper knife?" "I don't know, but I'm not proud of it, Lomas." "Whatever the things are, they may have been in the park for weeks. The bit of glass," here Reggie groaned, "wasn't near the crime, and if you know why anybody uses a scrap of bone to punch a man's head and drown him, I don't. There's such a lot of things I don't know. That's why I'm humble," said Reggie sadly. "Is there anything you do know, Lomas? What was in those papers you were browsing on?" Douglas Charlbury had a violent quarrel with Sir Rodney. It began with a racing dispute, that fishy affair in the Rutlandshire. The chief constable sighed and shook his head. Sir Rodney was getting a bad name on the turf. "There isn't a bad name Douglas didn't call him, and it got to threats, Fortune. Well. And then a large man who knew Sir Rodney's habits comes and hammers him. Something for your young god to explain, isn't it? But he did. He had an alibi." "Yes, they often have." Lomas smiled. "We shall see." But they did not see at the inquest, for the caution of Lomas decided to offer no more than the medical evidence, and the verdict was murder against persons unknown. It was afterwards that Reggie was called to Scotland Yard and found with Lomas Mr. Montague Finchampstead, the public prosecutor, that large and florid man. "Why do you look so happy, Finch?" he asked anxiously. "It flurries me. Finchampstead hopes to take action in the Trale murder," Lomas explained. "Zeal, all zeal," Reggie murmured. "I think it will probably be my duty, Fortune," said Mr. Finchampstead. "I have therefore called a consultation. On the facts brought before me, I consider there is a strong case against Douglas Charlbury. I do not, of course, wish to charge him with murder unless I can be reasonably sure of a conviction." Here Lomas yawned. "I shall be glad of your opinion on that." "You're not a moral man, Finch," said Reggie sadly. "You want to know if you can convict him. You ought to want to know if he did it." "I see no difference." Finchampstead rebuked him with dignity. "I consider the matter as a lawyer." "That's what I complain of," Reggie murmured. "Be good enough to consider the case." Douglas Charlbury had quarrelled with his uncle about the way Sir Rodney conducted his racing affairs. Sir Rodney's horse should have won the Rutlandshire handicap, and it was not placed, and Charlbury lost money. "Like the rest of the world," said Lomas. "The old man was a blackguard." "Quite possible," Finchampstead swept on. "There were other cases. Charlbury wrote furious letters. He suspected his uncle of arranging that the favourite should not win the Leeds Cup, and we have a letter in which he declares violently that he will interfere. That was written 3 days before the murder. On Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, Charlbury was playing cricket at Southampton. The match finished at noon. The rest of the team went on to Brighton by train. Charlbury had with him a small two-seater car. He left Southampton in the afternoon alone. He and his car were seen in the road near Chantry's that evening. We have a tramp who will swear that he saw a small car like Charlbury's deserted in the lane by the park that night. We found traces of that car, large footprints, and the stump of Aristides' cigarettes. We know Charlbury smokes that brand. We know that Sir Rodney was attacked by someone familiar with his habits. I understand you are prepared to testify that Sir Rodney's injuries were inflicted by a man of great physical strength. The cumulative force of this evidence is very strong. I shall be glad to hear if you have any doubt that it proves Charlbury guilty of the murder. Proves? Reggie Fortune searched for a cigar and bit it. What is proof? We don't often get it, do we? Too many unknown quantities in the calculation, Finch, but we've hanged men on weaker cases. In fact, you have no doubt yourself that Charlbury is guilty. I don't know, Reggie said slowly. Have you thought about the unknown quantities, Finch? My quartz face, my bit of ivory. They don't fit with Charlbury. They don't fit with anything, Lomas grumbled. I consider them irrelevant, said Finchamstead. There is no reason to connect them with the crime at all. I should not produce them in the case. Well, well, Reggie sighed. It's a wonderful thing, the legal mind. You'll have to produce me, Finch. And I shall have to say there was a punctured wound in the man's right eye, which could not have been made by a list. That's rather relevant. You said yourself that he might have fallen on a stump or a splinter or a spike. Yes, but we didn't find spike or splinter or stump. What does it matter? It is a trivial injury. You say so. And the assault was violent. Come, Fortune, have you any real doubt Charlbury was the murderer? Oh, Lord, yes, some. I don't like the case, Finch. I can't satisfy myself. And you don't satisfy me. Do you advise me not to bring Charlbury into court? If I were on the jury, would I convict? Reggie said slowly. I don't know, Finch. I don't know. It will be a deuced unpopular prosecution, Lomas grumbled. The shady old uncle who robbed the public rigging races is done in, and you put in the dock this handsome nephew who's a god on cricket and footer grounds. Damn it, Finch, you'll be hooted in court. I am aware it will be unpopular, said Finchamstead. That is another reason for pressing the case. I will let you know my decision. He went out in majesty. Well-meaning man, Reggie murmured. Does it all for the best. We are for it, Lomas. And confound him, I can't say he's wrong. Lomas, at least, was right. The prosecution was most unpopular. All England and the newspapers rallied round Douglas Charlbury. His portraits and the stories of his tries and his centuries were everywhere, and demonstrated to the satisfaction of all nice people that he was an innocent hero foully wronged. Yet a brutal bench of magistrates committed him for trial. His counsel was content to say nonchalantly that Mr. Charlbury preferred to reserve his defence, but had a perfect answer to the charge, and the opinion of the junior bar was that he would want all the answer he had got. The carefully marshalled evidence for the Crown was impressive. When the case was tried before little Justice Golding, cross-examination made a hole or two in the prosecution. The tramp, who swore to seeing a car in the lane, became a vague and unconvincing tramp. Inspector Morden could not swear that the footprints in the long grass would fit Douglas Charlbury's feet, and confessed that they were not precise footprints. Inspector Morden admitted that many people smoked Aristides' cigarettes. Inspector Morden could not explain how the body came from the scene of the fight to the lake. Mr. Fortune, unshaken, unshakable upon his evidence that the injuries were inflicted before death by a strong man, fists, declined to offer any theory of the wound in the eye. Not such an injury as you would expect in a fight, Mr. Fortune. No, You don't know how it happened? No. In fact, you don't know how Sir Rodney met his death? Yes. I know he was drowned after he had been hit, but you don't know how he was drowned? I don't know, Mr. Fortune agreed gravely. I don't know. Counsel turned to the jury. He doesn't know, the Crown's own expert doesn't know, gentlemen, and a man is charged with murder. There was a murmur in court. The junior bar looked at each other, and someone said, "That's torn it." Little Mr. Justice Golding took snuff like a bird pecking, put his head on one side and peered at the prisoner. Douglas Charlbury, filling the dock, made everybody else in court look commonplace, and his air of disdain for the whole affair was thought very noble by the writers of sketches of the trial. Counsel for the defence opened his case confidently. The jury would observe that he had nothing to answer, for the Crown had not proved that a murder had been committed. But in order that no shadow of suspicion should remain on Mr. Douglas Charlbury, he would show that Mr. Charlbury did not meet and could not have met his uncle on the night that Sir Rodney was drowned. Reggie Fortune looked at Lomas. "Nothing like an alibi, Sammy, nothing," he murmured. Douglas Charlbury went into the box. He swore that he had not seen Sir Rodney for many months. On the night of his death, he was travelling in his own small car from Southampton to Brighton. He came by way of Chichester, Houghton Bridge, and Steyning. It was therefore possible that he had been seen on the road near Chantries, but his car had not stopped there. He had dined at the Four-in-Hand Inn on the Grinstead Road, which was kept by an old servant of his father's, and spent the night there. He had been smoking with the landlord all the evening till he went to bed. Cross-examination only drew from him a justification of the violence of his letters to Sir Rodney. He had no doubt that Sir Rodney and his trainer had arranged for their horses to lose races. "And for you to lose money?" Counsel sneered. "Half the sportsmen in England lost money, sir." "And you naturally resented the loss." "I resented the foul play, sir. I resented the disgrace to my family. We have run straight for 300 years. "What did you mean by your threat to prevent Sir Rodney playing tricks with the favourite for the Leeds Cup?" "I meant that I would expose him, sir." Counsel let him go. Counsel could make nothing of the landlord of the Four-in-Hand Inn, and the landlady and their daughter. They swore that Mr. Douglas had come to their house at 8, and not gone out again. They were quite dear and confident. Little Mr. Justice Golding dozed while counsel made speeches. Little Mr. Justice Golding took snuff and said the case had been put before the jury with great ability. The jury might consider that the evidence justified the prosecution in bringing the prisoner to trial. They would observe that the manner of Sir Rodney's death remained obscure. The medical expert, Mr. Fortune, a very eminent man, the little judge made believe to search for a passage in his notes, said he didn't know. A dramatic pause. The little judge looked over his glasses at the jury. "He did not know, gentlemen," he repeated in a sepulchral voice, "and if they believed the evidence for the defence, they would see that however Sir Rodney met his death, it was not at the hands of the prisoner. That evidence was not answered. They must dismiss from their minds all prejudice against Sir Rodney and consider their verdict." "Poor old Finch," Mr. Fortune murmured. "Well-meaning man. Did it all for the best." The jury were not out of court 5 minutes. They found Douglas Charlbury innocent, and there was a cheer, and the little judge was deaf to it and took snuff and looked down his nose at the very red face of Mr. Montague Finchamstead. "Come on, Fortune," said Lomas. "Better get away before the crowd hangs us on the lampposts." But in the press seats a plump reporter, the crime specialist of the Daily Rag, said, "It was old Fortune got him off. He's deep, is Fortune. I wonder what his little game is." In the morning the papers were fuller than ever of Douglas Charlbury. He was a champion of British sport. He had suffered gloriously to vindicate the purity of the turf, and it was obvious to every sane man that he hadn't killed his uncle, and the officials who ordered the prosecution were fools and knaves. Thus logically the popular press, diverging into invective against the wickedness of owners who rigged races and robbed poor backers. And what was the Jockey Club doing? Over the telephone, Mr. Fortune asked Lomas to lunch. "Can you eat, Reginald?" said Lomas. "I have no appetite. I hear a mob in Whitehall howling for my blood." "How's Finch this morning?" A chuckle came over the wire. "Finch has gone sick." "So he ought to be," said Mr. Fortune. "Come along. Elise is putting on one of her best soufflés. I told her you wanted comfort." Not till that soufflé was eaten and the two men looked at each other with the eyes of those who have enjoyed pure art did Mr. Fortune come to business. He peeled a nectarine, he tasted it, he sipped his barsack. "Do you remember the Trale case, Lomas?" he said dreamily. "Good Lord, don't be brutal," Lomas groaned. "I was happy." "Curious family," Reggie murmured. "None of the family came to the trial, I think, Lomas. Miss Trale has been very ill, pneumonia." "What happens to the old man's estate? He left no will, divided between Douglas and his sister, and Miss Trale if she lives." "Yes, a curious family. I wonder. Lots of unknown quantities, I wonder." "Lomas, old thing, have you heard of anybody down at Chantry's who has anything to do with Yucatan?" "Good Lord," said Lomas again. "What are you thinking of now?" "My quartz face. I wish you'd have somebody look about for a person from Yucatan. Damn, I should have thought you had had enough of the case. You've got one man off." "Yes, that's on my conscience," said Reggie Fortune. "I'm not satisfied with the case, Lomas. There's more than we've found in it. Who drowned the beggar? I know it's unsatisfactory, and it's been deucedly bad for the department. I can send Morden down to see if he can hear of any connection with Central America. But it's snapping at shadows, Fortune." "Yes, send Morden. He snaps all right," said Reggie. So Inspector Morden, who was in a fierce and hungry state of mind, again took the air on the South Downs, and after a fortnight he came back with what his subordinates privately described as his tail up. His report was that he had been through Chantry's in the neighborhood with a small tooth comb, and found no one there who was known to have anything to do with Central America. Lomas yawned. "Out with it, Morden. You've got more than that. I see it in your bloodthirsty eye." Inspector Morden smiled. "I have, sir. There was a man handy when Sir Rodney was murdered who had just come from Central America, and he went back there just after." Lomas lit a cigarette. "Came over to drown Sir Rodney, I suppose?" "That's as may be, sir." Inspector Morden rebuked this flippancy. "Close to Chantry's there's a widow lady lives, Mrs. Stanton. She has a son, a geologist he is, who's been doing work in Central America for an oil company. Just before the murder he was staying with her. He went off on the Saturday morning. That's the day after, sir. Sailed for the West Indies that afternoon, and he's been out there ever since. But now they say he's coming back." Inspector Morden smiled again. "I reckon he thinks it's all clear, now the trial's over, any link between Mr. Stanton and the Trale family." "I couldn't make out anything particular, sir. His mamma's friendly with the ladies at Chantry's. He used to go there when he was at home. Nothing marked, as you might say, but it looks to me as if we were getting warm." "I'll ring up Mr. Fortune," said Lomas. Mr. Fortune, much against his will, was extracted from a hammock among the roses of his riverside garden and led by a stern parlour-maid to the telephone. "Fortune speaking," he groaned, speaking in his sleep. "You are a bad dream, Lomas. Go away." "We've found your Central American," said Lomas. "Come and hear all about him, Reginald. Interesting but enigmatic fellow." "I do not like you, Lomas," said Mr. Fortune sadly, "but you may dine with me. Goodbye." So it was under the tea rambler, which has heard so many tales of crime, that Lomas told him of the discovery of Charles Stanton. Mr. Fortune blew smoke rings into the moonlight. "What does it come to?" he said dreamily. "Our Central American is down there before the murder. He remains abroad till the trial is over and all is peace. Then he comes back. He is a bore, but for that, alas, we cannot hang him. He bothers me. Well, you wanted him, and we found him. What about it?" Mr. Fortune sighed. "You will be logical, Lomas. Let us see Charles of Yucatan. Let us talk to him." The chief of the Criminal Investigation Department wrote to Mr. Charles Stanton and asked him to call. A lean brown man presented himself to Lomas and Mr. Fortune. He had a mouth which shut tight. His manner was stiff. "Do sit down, Mr. Stanton. Sorry to trouble you, but I hope you'll be able to help us." Lomas was at his blandest. "Now I wonder if you can tell me, do you know anything of this trinket?" Stanton took up the quartz face and let it lie in the palm of his hand. "It's mine," he said, and showed no emotion. "A mascot of mine. The thing is a bit of Maya work I picked up in Yucatan." "I wonder if you ever gave it to anyone," Lomas suggested smoothly, "or lent it to someone, perhaps." Stanton frowned. "No, I didn't," he said sharply. "I always carried the thing till I lost it. Could you tell me when that was?" "I can't put a date to it, when I was last in England." "Or where you lost it?" "If I had known, I should have looked for it." "Yes, I suppose you would. Can you tell me how you lost it, Mr. Stanton?" "I've no idea. You are asking me the deuce of a lot of questions, sir. So sorry you should feel that. Well, Mr. Stanton, I must ask you one more. Your quartz face was found in the park at Chantry's just after the murder of Sir Rodney Trale and close to the scene of the murder. Can you give me any explanation of that?" Stanton stood up. "No," he said. "I'm wasting your time, Mr. Lomas. You won't get any further. Really, Mr. Stanton, you're not doing yourself justice." "I'm the judge of that, sir. You force me to ask you another question. Why did you leave the country immediately after the murder?" Stanton laughed. "Why don't you give me the usual warning? Anything I say may be used as evidence against me." "I have been asking you to assist us in investigating a crime," said Lomas gravely. "Do you wish me to understand you decline?" "I'm not responsible for what you understand, sir. Good day." And out he went. "Deeper and deeper yet," Reggie murmured. Lomas was using his telephone to give instructions that Mr. Stanton should be watched. A bold fellow. He smiled. "Not really as clever as he thinks he is, Reginald. He shouldn't have said quite so much if he was going to dry up when things got awkward. I wonder," Reggie murmured. "He knows something all right, but I wonder what he knows." He blinked a dreamy eye at Lomas. "He knows Mr. Charles Stanton had a hand in the murder." Mr. Fortune smiled. "Dear Lomas, that's what he meant you to think." That night, Lomas received a telegram from Douglas Charlbury. It was imperious. It instructed Lomas that he must be in his office next morning to receive Douglas Charlbury, who had something to say to him. The young god. Mr. Fortune chuckled as he heard it read, and Lomas damned its impudence. "But what makes him want to talk? Can it be Charles, his friend?" Charles wasn't talkative. Someone sitting up and taking notice. And Lomas said the cursed case was a nightmare. In the morning, Douglas Charlbury marched in upon them bigger than ever, so they have complained, more vigorous, more arrogant. "Who's this?" He scowled at Reggie. "I'm here to talk to you and nobody else, Mr. Lomas. Mr. Fortune is my colleague. Mr. Fortune knows all about your case." "Does he? I think not." "I shall not hear you except in his presence." Douglas Charlbury laughed. "Oh, if you want your fellows to know what an ass you've been, I don't care. Mr. Fortune, isn't it? The wonderful medical expert. You didn't cut much ice at my trial. Better try again, Doctor. Now, Mr. Lomas, you've been trying to drag Charles Stanton into this murder. Well, now you listen to me. I won't have it." Lomas put up his eyeglass. "Did I understand you to say you wouldn't have it? Don't put on side. You can't carry it." "Yes, I said I won't have it. You can't touch Charles Stanton, and you shan't touch him. You can't do anything. That's how you stand. The case is finished." "Because Mr. Douglas Charlbury was acquitted, I'm afraid that leaves us with a murderer at large." "Murderer nothing. Because I was acquitted and I killed the man. You meddle with anyone else, and the first thing you know I'll tell the world." Reggie sank deeper into his chair. Lomas stared a long minute. Then he said carefully, Have you come here to confess you murdered your uncle? No. A jury said, I didn't. You can't try me again. I'm innocent. But I swear to heaven I killed him. Then you confess you committed perjury at your trial and brought 3 witnesses to swear a false alibi? They believed what they swore, good souls. That's no perjury. And my God, I don't answer to you for what I did. You get up any dirty case against Charles Stanton or anyone else, and I'll own it all. I've got you by the short hairs, and don't you forget it. He stamped out. Lomas lay back in his chair. Good Lord, he gasped again and again. Good Lord, that is the biggest bluff that I ever met. Was it bluff? Reggie murmured. He meant it all. Did he? How can you tell? We can't call his bluff. If we had a case against Stanton and he came for the defense and swore he did the murder himself, half the jury would say he was a noble, self-sacrificing hero, and the other half wouldn't convict against his evidence. And he's been found innocent, and we've got nothing fresh against him but this melodramatic confession. Deuce take him, he has us beat. Yes, a dashing player at any game, said Reggie. Not a nice man to have against you, Lomas, old thing. Sir Rodney found that out, poor devil. I wonder, said Reggie Fortune, who Douglas Charlbury's playing for. Give the young god his due, he always plays for his side. He always plays to the gallery, Lomas growled. Damn, I believe he killed his uncle to get into the papers. It's a mad case, Fortune. No, said Reggie. No, I don't think so. There's something we haven't got. And somebody's had some luck. It's not me, Lomas laughed bitterly. That night, a letter came to Reggie Fortune. The old family doctor of Chantry's wished to consult him about Miss Trale. An attack of pneumonia had left her very weak, and she did not gain strength. The doctor was himself unable to suggest any treatment but rest and careful nursing. She had expressed a very strong wish to see Mr. Fortune, and if Mr. Fortune could give the time, it would be a kindness. In the morning, Reggie Fortune lay in his car and watched the dim blue line of the downs come dear of the mist till Charlbury stood sharp. He wondered whom he would meet at Chantry's. He did meet the old doctor, who was all apologies for troubling the great Mr. Fortune. A simple case, he feared. An old lady exhausted by illness, he knew of nothing for her but quiet and the grace of God. But she had been very anxious Mr. Fortune should come. Reggie nodded gravely. It appeared to him that the old doctor knew something he did not mean to say. Joyce Charlbury came into the Holt, pale and worn. Reggie found himself looking into tragic eyes. I hope we've done right, Mr. Fortune, the girl said. Yes, I think so, said Reggie Fortune. The frail bosom rose. Be kind to her. Oh, be kind, she said faintly. In a big room to which the sunlight came in many colours through the old uneven glass of an oriel window, Miss Trale lay in bed, a tiny shape which hardly raised the coverlet. Her face was grey as her hair. Her nurse rose as they came, set by her bedside an ebony stick, and flitted out. Only Mr. Fortune, Miss Trale said. Joyce looked at her and drew the old doctor away. Miss Trale turned laboriously and looked at Reggie. You know why I sent for you, she said. I killed my brother. Reggie sat down by the bedside and took her pulse in his hand. I'm a doctor, not a policeman, Miss Trale, he said gently. I believe you mean to do right. I have tried to do right. I read what you said at Douglas's trial. Oh, if I had known. If I had known. Bit I was ill, and they told me nothing. My poor boy. Douglas is safe. But now you are trying to accuse Charles Stanton. It wasn't he, Mr. Fortune. He did nothing. I killed Rodney. And I'm glad. She fell back panting. You need not fear for Mr. Stanton, Reggie said gently. I want you to know. I want to make sure there is nobody but me. Rodney was wicked. He played foul, he always did. But we kept it hidden till this rascal Fern came to him. Then he began to cheat with his horses. Do you know what that meant to us, Mr. Fortune? Our colours have been on the turf 100 years, and he He had his horses run crooked, a trail of chantries. That was why Douglas quarrelled with him. But he went on. Then Douglas heard he was playing tricks with a big race, and that night, Douglas came that night to stop him. They met down there in the park. It was he struck Douglas first, Mr. Fortune. I saw him. I was out there with my darling Joyce. Charles Stanton was coming to say goodbye to her before he went away, and Rodney had forbidden her to have him in the house. Oh, that was like Rodney, and while they talked beyond the garden, I watched in case Rodney should come. Douglas and Rodney fought, and Douglas knocked him down and left him, and Rodney came on swearing and found me. I am lame, you know. I don't move very quickly. He said I had brought Douglas to beat him, and he struck at me. I lifted my stick to keep him off, my ivory stick, and he broke it. I hit him in the face. I think it went into his eye. That was what I found. I see now. That didn't kill him, Miss Trale. No. But he fell into the lake, and I threw the stick into the water and went away, and he was drowned, and I found Joyce and brought her back to the house. I did not tell her then. I left him. I did it. It was no one but me, Mr. Fortune. Do you understand? Do you believe me? I believe you, Miss Trale, said Reggie Fortune. I understand everything. There will be no more trouble. For no one. Neither for you nor anyone else. It is finished. I had to do it, she said feebly. I am not sorry, Mr. Fortune. He made us ashamed. She looked at Reggie Fortune. She took up the ebony stick by the bedside and tapped, and the nurse came. You will have no more trouble, Miss Trale, Reggie said. There is rest now, only rest. Goodbye. He bowed over her hand and turned away to meet at the door Joyce Charlbury. She drew him out. Is that true what you said? She whispered eagerly. Reggie looked down into her dark, wild eyes. Yes. No more trouble. No more fear. It's finished. Ah. She put her hand to her brow and trembled. Yes, you knew all the while. It's been hardest for you. Me? She laughed. Oh, Douglas had worse. He played the game. Reggie smiled. You've all played the game. Goodbye, Miss Charlbury. And he went down to the hall where the old doctor was waiting for him under those family portraits of large, arrogant men and frail women. Yes. A curious family, Doctor, said Mr. Fortune. End of The Young God by H.C. Bailey.